Commander Chikopov believed in leading from as close to the front as he was sensible for a man of his rank. The first assaults on Kazale had been accompanied by the dropping from orbit of the Merciless, an ocean-going command vessel, from which Chikopov could command the battle's opening stages beyond the range of Kazale's defenses. The Merciless was one of the most advanced vessels of its kind in the segmentum, being festooned with sensor baffling and defensive systems, and a comms and tactical cognitor suite that allowed Chekopov's staff to coordinate the whole assault. At that moment, it knifed through the ocean's swell, surrounded by a buzzing halo of scout aircraft, scouring the surface for threats. Inside, the controlled atmosphere was kept calm and chill. Everywhere was dark, pools of light around cognitor screens and map tables serving to focus attention where it was needed. The labyrinth of corridors and subdecks connected the ship's most sensitive areas, as well as the brig where a single prisoner squatted in the middle of its cell. 6 cells made up this block of the brig. Each cell was devoid of doors or windows, with only a trap door as a way in or out. A walkway crossed above the cells, and it was on this that Lord Commander Chikopov of the Imperial Guards stood to get a close look at the high-value captive of the war for Opus. 3 officers of Battlefleet Obscurus Naval Intelligence Regiment accompanied Chikopov, and their almost featureless dark blue uniforms. Chikopov had once been one of them in a long distant career, and still entrusted to them intelligent functions of his command. "It calls itself Janik Filtheimer," said one of the officers. "Is that all we know?" said Chikopov. He was a tall man, who had once been well built, who had lost the muscle of his youth. The age fatigue of his old naval regiment hung on him, as did the black greatcoat he wore over them. Countless medals were attached to his chest, or to the lapels of his coat. Later medals were honorary, awarded for service and victories as a commander over whole Imperial Guard armies. Over his long-lined face was the peaked cap of a naval officer. "We have not conducted a thorough interrogation," came the reply from another officer. "It was not thought sensible to question a moral threat such as this without your authorization. Such courses of action have unpredictable consequences." "Very well," said Chikopov. "You have my permission. It is time to see what gift the Imperial Fists have brought us. Ensure the first stages are handled by someone who will not be gravely missed. Extricating intelligence from such a thing is rarely without casualties." "Yes, Commander." The thing in the cell looked up at Chikopov, as if it could hear him, though the cell was soundproofed. It was half man, half fly, with several extra limbs, a fat abdomen, and segmented eyes. A hastily sutured wound split its face in two, with another running from its sternum down the whole underside of its belly. A cursory medical examination had shown it suffered injuries too severe to survive, but it was kept alive by something more malevolent than integrity of its body. It was chained to the floor with links of gold and silver, inscribed with anti-psychic wards that dampened whatever mental powers Janik Filtheimer might still possess. Even so, the polished steel of its cell was discolored. The polished steel of its cell was discolored and rusted around it, the thing's aura of decay bleeding through the psychic defenses built into the brig of the Merciless. Mandibles flicked between torn lips. Its mouth opened, revealing a long, parched tunnel of a throat. Whatever the chaos creature ate, it was being starved of it in the brig. Heavy footsteps caught Chikopov's attention. Into the brig had walked a man who was not a man. He was enormous, his head brushing the ceiling of the brig, more than 2.5 meters above the floor. His armor was polished blue, with yellow shoulder pads emblazoned with the symbol of a clenched fist. The intelligence officers looked at the newcomer. with apprehension, but Chikapov did not flinch. "Commander," said the Space Marine, "I have come to see the moral threat that you hold here. I am Dephobius, librarian of the Imperial Fists, and I am here under the orders of First Captain Lysander." Dephobius emerged into the better light that shone down into the cells. His smooth dark skin was interrupted by the band of silver around his brow, with circuits and interfaces leading off from it. The collar of his armor rose up into a hood, arcing over his head, and the inner surface studded with purple crystals. He carried a long staff of gnarled wood, topped with a gilded horned skull that was the symbol of the librarian's office. "My officers have the means to extract whatever this creature has to tell us," said Chikapov. "I thank you for your offer, librarian, but Feldhammer is to be dealt with under my orders." "I very much doubt that, Commander," replied Dephobius. "That you have on your staff a psyker as powerful as I, much less one who has dealt with such moral threats many times in the past. Furthermore, the Imperial Fists are under no orders from you, and are here to fulfill their honorable duty to the throne of Earth. It is an act of goodwill that saw Janek Feldhammer delivered to you at all. This war is in far too early to stage to be taking that goodwill lightly." Lord Commander Chikapov considered this for a moment. He looked up and down at the thing in his cell, and held his arms wide. "All yours," he said. "Good luck." A ladder reeled down from above, down through the trapdoor into the transparent ceiling, and Dephobius descended into the presence of Janek Feldhammer. Previously, Feldhammer had been a horror. His full height was greater than that of a space marine, and his sorcerous powers had given him an aura of terror that had cowed lesser minds that approached him. The sheer implications of his shape were bad enough. He must have entered some awful pacts with the powers he served to grant him the aspects of a disease-bloated fly. Or perhaps he was the result of some crossbreeding project pursued by the cultists hidden in Opus's society. Nothing about him was natural, and in any other situation, everything about him would have been horrific. But he was chained and imprisoned. His wounds were barely dressed, and they wept yellowish gore down the matted bristles that covered his hide. He was bent and constrained, unable to reach his full height or unfurl his many limbs. His head was forced down by a chain around his neck, so he could barely lift his face-lidded eyes to look at the space marine who now stood before him. "My kind are legion," said Janek Feldhammer. Your kind will be rounded up, shot and incinerated. The ashes will be mixed with signaling acid and fired into the nearest star," said Dephobius. "Do not waste my time, or your rapidly shortening life with threats. I have been threatened by far more dangerous creatures than you, and none of them have outlived me." Feldhammer did not reply. His mandibles chided and lapped, as if he were trying to think of a reply. Instead, without his mind dulled by the psychic wards built into the brig, he would have come up with something. "How came you to be on Opus?" said Dephobius. "The warp willed me into being," said Feldhammer. "I was born from the mud of an ocean floor." "You are a man," retorted Dephobius. "I hatched from the belly of a virgin maid. You are a man, nothing more. How came you to Opus?" "The ordure of the city flowed to the lowest clogged pits of its sewers, and there I emerged, congealed from their leavings as worms and meat." "You are boring me, whelp," snapped Dephobius. "Why always the same charade?" The librarian clasped his gauntlet from his left and pulled it away. He placed his bare hand on the bristly forehead of Janek Feldhammer. The one-time champion of chaos tried to recoil, but his chains gave him no range of movement to avoid Dephobius' hand. Flesh smoked. The most appalling smell of burning filth filled the cell. Feldhammer's mandibles yawed open, and he let out a rattling gargling sound, perhaps the closest his physiology could make to a scream. Dephobius's fingers sank into the flesh of his forehead, the corrupted skin blistering and peeling away. Dephobius's teeth gritted. The metal walls of the cell buckled and warped. "What you will not tell me," he grimaced, "I will tear from your mind." Dephobius's mind was a carefully prepared place, a battlefield built to give the advantage to his own consciousness when arrayed against an enemy. That enemy was the mind of Janek Filthhammer, and in the psychic concept that Dephobius had prepared, Filthhammer appeared as a great seething horde, a crawling darkness. Isolated memories stood like banner bearers or generals, with cavalry darting and writhing on the flanks, and masses of barely formed infantry flowing in the enormous banks of dark filth that heaved at its center. Dephobius had spent countless sessions of meditations, preparing his own mental army, visualizing every component. Roigel Dorn himself at their head. A legion of shining, gilded imperial fists marched alongside them. Dephobius had memorized the faces of the chapters long dead, resurrecting them in his mind to give his mental defenses and psychic probing a concrete form. Roigel Dorn motioned for the charge. The gilded legion stormed to the mass of Filthhammer's corrupted mind, silver blades cutting through the darkness. With every pace, Dephobius cut deeper into Filthhammer, peeling back the layers of defenses, and laying bare the secrets he now fought to preserve. In another part of Dephobius' mind, carefully separated from the conflict by a great battlement modeled after the defenses of Terra, which Dorn himself had designed, Filthhammer's memory fragments played out as it projected onto a bank of pick streams. Dephobius discarded those which were irrelevant, insane revels, mad rantings, dark rituals to reanimate dead followers, or mutate living ones. They had little more value than to illustrate what happened to the Imperial force on Opus already. Suspected. Chaos demagogues and champions had been here for some time, marshalling the resources to operate in safety for perhaps decades. Several fragments were assembled by Dephobius' mind into a sequence showing Filthhammer's arrival. A derelict ship, its crew dead by plague, drifted as if by accident into Opus's orbit. A salvage crew had brought a strange biomechanical container onto the surface, hoping it was some piece of valuable archaeotech. It was, in fact, the cocoon Filthhammer had extruded around himself. He had promised to teach the crew of this Chaurist craft the secrets of his immortality, as he had demonstrated to them by surviving extremes of vacuum and supposedly mortal wounds. Instead, he repaid them for passage on their ship by seeding it with fatal diseases and setting the ship to drift to Opus. The space lanes of the Imperium were full of such tales. More interesting was why. Filthhammer had not chosen Opus by accident. He had been called. Dephobius strove to find out just why he had come, out of the millions of planets in the Imperium, to this one. The army of his mind was tearing through Filthhammer. The champion's mind was a foul place, crammed with memories and instincts, beliefs and perversions, which gave birth to a legion of ill-formed horrors. Dephobius joined his warriors on the battlefield, drifting like an astral projection through the carnage until he found a place in Filthhammer's mind that did not fight, a hardened, calloused, a rigid call of gnarled emotion, thick enough to withstand the rest of the champion soul tearing at it. Dephobius sorted through the mental constructs he had created just for this task. He rejected a sword and bolt gun, crafted from gold, that he imagined hovering in the air in front of him. From his mind's armory, he selected an axe, and like a lumberjack, he set about hacking his way through Filthhammer's defenses. The fragments poured thick and jumbled from the wounds. Another part of Dephobius calmly reviewed and rejected them, half-remembered fragments of a childhood and early adulthood on some teeming industrial mass of a hive world. Filthhammer, whoever he had been brought up in squalor and brutality. Probably he had used that as an excuse in the early ages of his corruption. Dephobius discarded all this. The monster's childhood did not have any bearing on the war for Opus. Piece by piece, a figure was revealed. Naked and filthy, crouched in a grime-streaked obulette. It was a man, with sandy-colored hair, a body worked to wiry strength by the manual labor, and the scarred hands that told of a lifetime in the manufactorum or in the mine face. His figure was scarred and alone, starved and confused. It was Filthhammer, or rather, it was the man Filthhammer had been, buried and cut off and surrounded by a prison of hatred and determination, where he could not bother Filthhammer with the conscience and abhorrence of a normal human mind. The man looked up at Dephobius. His eyes were deep, as if sunk into the back of his skull. His tears ran from those dark hollows. "Tell me," said Dephobius, "everything, all that you know, about why you are here, and who brought you to this world." The man who had become Janek Filthhammer shook his head in confusion. The prison shook. Dephobius turned his mind back to the surface of Filthhammer's mind, where the monster fought off the librarian's psychic assault. The legions of darkness were turning on themselves, limbs and tendrils tearing at malleable bodies. Dephobius's legion wallowed through a swamp of black gore, as the enemy dissolved in a frenzy of self-mutilation. "I have no time," demanded Dephobius. "Tell me everything." The man stared open-mouthed. The cell around him was coming apart. The walls were flaking away, revealing the layers of petrified muscle and bone which Filthhammer had hidden in his place. The world was falling apart. Dephobius could not maintain the integrity of the battlefield. He rolled back his consciousness, and his legion withdrew, leaving in their wake a gaping black void, which grew as Filthhammer rose in his own mind. Oblivion, like a freezing ocean, welled up in this place, destroying everything in the Chaos Champion's memory. The ocean flowed in the oblate. The walls dissolved, and the man was hanging on a void, his own shape barely coherent among the chaos. "Legistrasse," the man said. "What does that mean?" said Dephobius. "Is that the name? Who is it? Who brought you here?" Then everything that Janek Filthhammer was, and had been, was swallowed up by oblivion, and Dephobius was plunged into the freezing abyss of an annihilated mind. Dephobius pulled his hand back from Filthhammer's skull. Filthhammer sagged in his chains, his head hanging and mouth lolling open. The flesh of his forehead smoldered around the charred imprint of Dephobius's hand. The eyes were dull. "Life signs nil," said one of the intelligence officers, observing from the walkway overhead. "Did he know anything, librarian?" asked Chekapov. Dephobius regarded him with some distaste. Filthhammer's rancid flesh stuck to his palm. "No," he replied. "Aside from that, he did not come from this world. But that is hardly a surprise. A planet like Opus can only breed so many like this on its own, no matter how deep its corruption." "A shame," said Chekapov. "But it is surely too much to ask for the key to Opus's liberation to be delivered to us in the first exchanges, is it not?" Dephobius looked at the Lord Commander. It was impossible to read Chekapov's expression or voice. "There will be others," said Dephobius. "Ketrop's findings suggest several moral threats on Opus. Filthhammer will not be the last, nor the most senior we encounter. And as far as fellow servants of the Emperor's will, we shall all reap the benefits when they are brought low," said Chekapov. "If Filthhammer has taught us all we can, you will forgive me if I join my regimental advisors. In light of the day's actions, there are many decisions to be made regarding the principal landings." "Of course," said Dephobius. "Destroy the body. Leave not even ashes." Though Scout Sergeant Orphos's mind was set in the grim, serious path of warfare, though the weight of his duty and his orders held his soul down, he could not help but feel exhilaration at the sheer speed. The engine of his bike shrieked as Orphos gunned to its maximum. A great plume of dust shredded up in the air behind it as it streaked across the plain. Some distance to the east rose the outskirts of Gazeo, the glittering spires already marred by a few columns of smoke. It was on this plain that Gazeo could be forged in Opus's ages past, in a series of battles that had seen the Aristia win the lordship of the planet they had held ever since. Mass war graves and abandoned siege engines had been preserved as memorials and triumphs, breaking up the dusty plain between the city and the wounded foothills in the west. This was a place denuded of life by the battles that had been fought here, as if the war dead beneath the surface were too jealous of life to let anything else live where they had died. Squad Orphos told a wide arc around a triumphal arch, hammered into shape from the armor plates of war machines captured centuries before. Ahead of them, another spray of dirt marked the location of a convoy that from this distance Orphos could see was composed of 4 vehicles. They were fast and rugged, each with 8 wheels riding over uneven terrain, and gun turrets mounted on the tops of their hulls. "Evade and close in!" shouted Orphos on his Voxlink. He ripped the handlebars to one side as the bike slid around, almost sideways, as the convoy's first fire fell among them. His squad burst in different directions. 5 bikes executing an approach pattern they had practiced so many times they no longer needed to think. Within a few moments, the distance had closed, so the opening salvos of the heavy stubber ripped into the earth well behind them. Scouts Priver and Grius opened to full throttle and shrieked towards the front of the convoy, turning as they overtook it to approach it head-on. Orphos led Vortrez and Aaron to approach it from the rear, sliding through twin arcs of stubber fire. Orphos squeezed the firing stud between his thumb, and the twin bolters of his scout bike scattered explosive fire across the back of the rearmost vehicle. It was an armored personnel carrier, painted in the bright livery of a house of the Aristia. Armor plates buckled and sparked. The rear ramp swung down, and Orphos could see men moving inside, black-clad with featureless visors, Hellgun carbines leveled to fire. Orphos swerved to one side as the troops opened up. Vontrez took a couple of shots in the front fairing side of his bike, and he fought to keep control, falling behind the convoy as the bike wriggled underneath him, as if trying to escape. Orphos passed behind the APC, firing his mounted guns as he went, and the bodies fell from the back as bolter fire thunked into flesh. Inarin was alongside the rearmost vehicle. He had a melta bomb in his hand and a disc-shaped magnetic charge. "Do it!" shouted Orphos in the Vox. Inarin threw the charge against the side of the vehicle, the magnetic surface clamping to it just above the wheel arc. The melta bomb detonated in a burst of cherry red, throwing clots of molten steel into the air. The front wheels came clean off, and the APC plowed in the ground, burying its nose in the dirt and flipping it end over end. A moment later, Priver and Grius roared past in the opposite direction. In their wake, the first vehicle in the convoy rolled over and over. The wheels on one side blasted off, components flung clear as the structure disengaged. The second vehicle collided with the first, slamming into it heavily enough to spin it right around. The remaining APC braked, turrets trying to get a beat on Orphos' squad as they circled the wreckage of the convoy. The troops were jumping from the vehicles. Many had survived the crashes, and Orphos could see their uniforms did not match the bright livery of their vehicles. They wore black without the rank flashes, brocade, or household banners common to the soldiers fielded by the Aristia. One among them was different. Instead of functional body armor, he wore a suit of plate steel inlaid with gold, and he carried what looked like a crossbow with a magazine of bolts, allowing it to be fired rapidly without reloading. Streamers of crimson and emerald silk fluttered from the crest of his helm. The faceplate was open, and he had a face lined with sheer arrogance. "That's their package," shouted Orphos. "2 passes and close. Vontrez, are you with us?" "At your side, Brother Sergeant," replied Vontrez. Laz fire buzzed through the air as Orphos led the squad in. Orphos drew his combat knife as he closed in, firing as he weaved between the volleys of Laz shots. The enemy, whoever they were, had decent training. Most men would break and run to be chased down by the bikers. These stood and fired side by side. Some fell to the bolter fire. Orphos streaked past them and lashed out in his blade. A head came away from its body, the impact running up Orphos' arm. The squad roared up for a second pass, leaving half a dozen dead in their wake. More fell as they approached, and Orphos aimed for the knot of troops forming up around the armored aristocrat. This time he cut down low and sliced the man halfway through the waist, the blade carving down and through the leg of a second before Orphos was past. As he wheeled back, he saw Grace's bike losing control and sliding out from under him, the scout vanishing as he skidded into the cloud of dirt and wreckage. Orphos braked and slid in, leaping from the bike. He drew his bolt pistol and fired even as he ran behind the overturned rear vehicle, snapping off shots at the troops. Laz fire hissed against the hull of the wrecked APC, and a pair of grenades sailed past them. Orphos ran out of cover, firing as he did so, falling to one knee. The grenades cooked off and showered him with earth and debris. He kept his footing and rattled off another volley, black-clad figures falling. Inarin scattered right into them, his combat blade in one hand and pistol in the other, and in a few seconds he killed the 2 men and was setting about the others. The enemy were better shots than they were fighters up close. The Imperial Fist scouts had all the fury of their fully armored battle brothers, and Inarin was a fine close combatant, as Orphos had led in this short. Inarin was as fine a close combatant as Orphos had led in his short career as scout sergeant. He jabbed the blade up on the chin of another. He jabbed his blade up the chin of one enemy as he stamped down the neck of another, shattering the enemy's femur and crushing down onto the ground. A moment later, Privar's bike ran through the fallen man, flipping his broken body into the air as the bike skidded to a halt. The remaining vehicle ground through the wreckage, his turret tracking. Orphos ducked back into cover to deny a target, just as Brother Grayus emerged, on foot from the swirling dust in Privar's wake. Glowing molten holes opened up in the turret,